Sebo said that, well, Sebo's explanation that he is out of the VC or he left the VC was, let's say, an incident. Well, the second one, Jarno said that he is as well out of the VC, and that's already a trend. Well, and I'm saying now that a month ago I as well exited the VC, so that you have to make some conclusions out of this. So when I was asked to talk in this event, my first reaction is, oh gosh, what am I going to talk about? But then I thought, well, I have been actually very lucky in my 20-plus career. I got a first-hand experience in all of the major sectors in this healthcare segment, in healthcare. So I have been in medical devices, in diagnostics, and even managed to be as a CEO of a biotech company, although I'm an engineer by background. As I said, in those 20-plus years, at one point of time, I was heading the European marketing department of a US medical device company, as well as running a 30-plus professionals biotech company as a CEO in Finland. So, of that experience, and with the help of Merit, when we were discussing what should be the topic, we came, well, commercialization of healthcare technology feels like a good topic for this audience. I didn't see you in the beginning, but can you please raise your hands, the ones who are working or dealing with the healthcare technologies? Great. So I'm going to go to you. So the next 30 minutes, I'm going to go through the main challenges that any commercialization of any technology experiences. And then, how is it actually translated? What are the challenges in the healthcare technology commercialization? With some examples from the medical device, diagnostics, and drug development. And at the end, the lessons that you can take away. Now, if you look at the companies around, this is probably the picture you will find out. First you go through the development, then is the commercialization taking, and then is the market entry. Most of the companies, regardless of what stage they are, whether they are early stage or they are corporate, they deal this way. Is that the best way to do? Because when you come with a product at the market entry, and then you observe something, you observe that actually you need to do some changes in the design. Then you go back to that. Now, this is a very expensive way of doing it. What is interesting is that actually, organizationally, it's very easy to deal because it is structured, and this is what we are used to do. And from a project management point of view, it's as well very easy to deal with it. So, in a way, this is the obstacle, and this is probably one of the reasons why traditionally it's still going this sequential approach. Now, when we look at the funding resources, very often, now talking about the startup companies, actually the funding ecosystem is supporting this because the public funding is usually given to the product development and very little for the commercialization. My God, this word is difficult. The venture capitals are not getting in the product development. They don't like to take that risk. They usually step either at the end of the commercialization or rather prefer at the market entry. Now, what is the other way of doing it? It is the parallel approach. This is the best way of doing it. This is where you really get the results. In reality, that means that there should be a constant dialogue between the product development and any group that is involved in the selection, buying, evaluation, approval of the products. Organizationally, that is not easy to manage. And at the end, is the funding system around, or the ecosystem supporting this way of working? I would say not much. So, what what is commercialization about? Well, the first thing to do is to do the market validation, right? And so in the market validation, which is actually very different from a market research, and very often it is confused that once you have done the market research, you already know everything about the market you need to enter. Now, the questions we can group in three. The first group is around the customers, the clients, the buyer. You know, he's the favorite. You can call him any names, or her. And then the questions are around about the problem. This. Okay, can I put that in my pocket? Will that work? Yes. So I listed three main challenges that any technology commercialization faces. Now, the first challenge is to understand the technology adoption process. Now, what does that mean? It means that you need to look at the process of the client. What is exactly being done? Who does what? After that, the second challenge is to describe how is your technology going to change it? How is your technology going to actually change the workflow and the processes? Who is going to be affected by this? And how is that going to be affected? And the third part is, how do you communicate to all of them? So what are the right ways to do that, the right channels to communicate it? Now, are those different from the healthcare technology? Not much. They're pretty the same, but we deal here with different stakeholders. So, of course, the first thing is, again, is to understand the technology. Here is really to look at the real benefits. And it's not easy. I mean, it's easy to say it, but when you start really looking at what are the real benefits that this technology is bringing to the stakeholders that you have already identified. What is the clinical practice today? Who does what? Who would not like to use this technology? Who will be against it? And why? And so this really needs to do the mapping of the current practice, clinical practice. Then afterwards is to figure out is actually what is it in for every single one of them? What are their interests? What drives them? Because everybody has their own agenda, and that agenda is either explicit or actually two agendas. You have explicit agenda and you have a hidden agenda. And once you're doing this process, you need to go behind and understand what is in there for them. And you need to quantify, and that is the difficult part, is to quantify the proposition to all of the stakeholders. And the third one is to sell it to them. So whose opinion really matters? Who are the people you need to approach? And what are the channels? What is the appropriate way to do that? So a lot of questions that needs to be answered in that process. Now, here you see all of the stakeholders that are involved in always in the healthcare technology use or in the healthcare segment. Now there are more of them, but those are always there. So those cannot be avoided. And all of them have their own interest and their own agenda. Now, depending on the clinical practice and depending on the product, the importance and the weight of them vary. For example, if we talk about the self-diagnostics, of course, the patient, the doctor that recommends, and the pharmacy will have a great weight on which product to buy. But actually, the one organization, and that is the insurance company, may actually push the red button and not give the approval for the product. So those are the things that needs to be understood. Now, next part is to look at the interests of every single stakeholder depending on whether we have a medical device or a diagnostics or new drug on the market. Now, those slides, I understood they will be provided, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but just to point some of them that are important. Now, in the medical device, it's clear that for the patient, a lot counts, whether it's invasive procedure, how comfortable is the procedure, how long does it take, and so on. Now, for the doctor is usually what is the benefit that he can get. Can he get better? Can he treat this patient better? Can he treat him faster? Those are the questions those are the things that the doctors understood. And in the beginning, I think, Seppo, we were talking, you raised the question about the payments. So yeah, very often, this point is kind of not taken seriously. So how is the doctor gonna, let's say that, how is the doctor's payment gonna be affected by our new medical device? And if there is any reason to believe that it's gonna go down, believe me, this guy is not gonna be on your side. So you have to work out to find a good reasons and rationale to prove that actually if the income per patient gets down, he may get more or she may get more patients. That's one way of doing it. And of course the purchaser and the payer, in this case insurance companies, they are always concerned about the clinical outcome or reduction of cost of healthcare, or reduction of cost of therapy in that case. Now, let me go through an example of real life. The situation, imagine American company bringing a new product to the market. And we have a cell therapy group here. And the product is collecting cells from the donors to be given to the patients who are undergoing cancer therapy. The trials are run in multiple centers in US and European countries, and the results are super, so the product gets CE marked. The marketing department decides actually to test the device in the hands of the users so that it's not anymore any protocols, because of course for the CE marking, everybody ran it under the protocol. Now this time we said, okay, have it and use it and tell us what you think. And that happened in number of countries. Now some users were very happy, and the other ones said the product is not, the device is not working. And the marketing group said, well, you need more training. So we sent some more people there, gave them the training, still coming the same. The product is not working because the cells are not active. The cells are not functioning. So if the cells are not functioning, they cannot be given to the patient. If they cannot be given to the patient, the device is useless. Nobody will use it. Nobody will pay. Okay, there we had the problem. So finally we said, okay, let's compare the clinical practice, how they work, because until now we were all focused on the person who was using the device and not looking actually at the whole process of it. Well, in the whole process, we have a donor, we have a collection center. What else do we have? And we have the hospital and we have the patient. And so we spent some time looking at the differences between the US, because in US every single customer was very happy. So we had the problems in the European countries. So it cannot be so, right? So we looked at the process, and what we found out, that we found two major differences that we didn't know. First of all, the donors that are used in US, they had a higher cell count in their blood, so to collect a certain amount of cells was much shorter procedure. Now, in some European countries, every single donor was accepted. And that meant that in some cases, the procedure was run almost double.
That means the device was running much longer than anybody thought. Fine. The next difference. When the cells are collected, they have to be tested like every other blood product, that they are free of any infectious diseases. Now, that testing in the States is done in the central laboratories. So the sample is shipped there, and 2 days, nothing is done to the cells, and then the result comes. The product is released and given to the donors. Now, in some of the European countries, the system is different. So in 3 hours, so the sample is shipped straight to the next hospital, the tests are done, received in few hours, and the product is released. So we saw here that the release time of that product in US and Europe and some European countries was different. And so we saw that the differences are coming from the running time, and and that had an effect on as well on the cell activity. So of course, as that was fixed by doing some design changes, the product was ready and launched. Now, that happened in a well-funded company with all the resources in the world you can think. So there was not much of a delay actually in this process. But imagine if that was a startup company. That would have been a totally different outcome in that case. So just to emphasize how important it is to look at the whole process, not only where your product or your technology is affecting. Look at the whole thing. Now, in the diagnostic testing, again, those are the same stakeholders. In the diagnostic testing, it may be a bit more complicated because here you may have to look at two processes. One that is happening at the testing site, and that's in the laboratory, how the test is being done. And the second process is how the results are used in the delivery of care to the patient. Here, there is no way to emphasize how important is the reimbursement, which is, again, often forgotten. But in US, they say, if it isn't billable, it isn't going to happen. That means that if the hospital cannot bill the insurance companies, nobody will buy the test or the device. And that is absolutely relevant for countries where the private and public healthcare exist. Now that's the US and Germany, and they happen to be one of the biggest healthcare markets, so better not ignore them. The other important thing here is the CE marking, and that is important. I mean, that matters for the devices as well as for the diagnostic tests. So the strong belief is that once you get the CE mark, you already have the ticket to the party. Well, it's actually very far from the truth, because the CE mark only says that your product is safe. It doesn't say that anybody will buy it or anybody wants to buy it. It's still a long way to go. Here I'm going to actually try to keep you a bit awake, so let's do this together. Now, this is a very new diagnostic testing technology company. They have managed to achieve the following. I don't know whether you see the text, but they have managed to achieve the following. The test is able to do pathogens, or to identify, to detect pathogens, bacteria and viruses. The test takes only 10 minutes. It can detect multiple pathogens, up to 100. No need for DNA purification, so very simple sampling. And now in the commercialization process, the big question is, what is the test? What is the first application this company needs to develop? With which application to enter the market? Okay, so if you look at the time, here it is important, so 10 minutes is a quite short time. So where are the biggest benefits? The biggest benefits are, of course, in the cases where the doctor has to make a decision very fast, usually if it's an acute situation, right? So you have to start the treatment almost immediately. Pathogens. The fact that 100 pathogens, that's quite a lot, but anyway, the fact that many pathogens can be detected at once, why is it so important? Of course, in diseases where the physician needs to know which pathogen is causing the disease in order to be able to target, to choose the right antibiotics. And the simple sampling means only that can be done anywhere, can be done very close to the bed or bedside or at home, any place. Okay, so any suggestions? Where to start from? Did you listen to Seppo's presentation? Right. Well, of course, respiratory tract infections, because when your child is sick and you go to the hospital, and usually it depends on which country you are. In Finland, you will be told, come in 3 days, and then I'll tell you the results, but here is the recipe, so prescription. Here's the prescription, so I'll call you and then I'll tell you whether you should go and buy the antibiotics. If you're in Greece or in Bulgaria, you get straight the antibiotics, which is not a good thing to do. The other place where the other alternative for the test, of course, is for example, sepsis, because sepsis in the intensive care, it's a killing disease, right? And sepsis is usually, you cannot know what is caused. It could be caused by many, many pathogens. So it is very critical here to find out which one or which ones are causing it and to give the right antibiotics. Losing time here is really patient critical. So those are pretty much the two ways to enter the market if we take this commercialization approach. Well, if we talk about the new drug development, that is even more complicated, because usually commercialization in the drug development companies means partnering with pharmaceutical companies for either for additional funding or to get an access through their channels. And so, but regardless of that, you still need to do the same work. You still need to think of how this product is going to be purchased and how this product is going to be used. And here it's extremely important, the regulatory piece. It's never straightforward with the regulatory groups. And the faster you are or the earlier you're involved with the regulatory bodies, the less mistakes you will make on the way. Now I'm going to here bring another example. So that was the situation is the following. New managing director comes into the drug development company at the stage phase 2A, so quite advanced for a small company. It's an achievement on its own. The product is an adjunct therapy. That means that the product is always to be given with another primary drug. So they always go together. So the market itself is very defined because the patient who is getting the primary drug will get as well the adjunct, the new drug. And the intended therapy is to reduce, or the indication is to reduce the building of the resistance within the pathogens against that primary drug. I mean, this is really a very important topic because with antibiotics, that's the point. 2 years after the introduction of any new antibiotics, you already see some resistant strains to it. So it is extremely difficult to actually get the companies developing antibiotics because their time for selling is very short. Now the challenge, and okay, well, we started the commercialization phase. Looked at it, started talking to the potential partners, and the potential partners said, well, okay, your primary drug or your market, which is defined by the primary drug, your market is too small. Well, okay, well, what is small? The market itself is about multiple $100 million. Now, for us, it's a pretty big market. But for the partners, it wasn't. So we decided that we have to do something about it. We have to look at another primary drug. The second question, or the second challenge, we went to the FDA a couple of times and asked the question, okay, this product has a fantastic benefits to the public health because you can keep the antibiotics working, right? Yes, that's good. But we cannot actually prove, we cannot approve, we cannot give you permission to sell that product if it doesn't do any substantial benefits to the patient who is taking this drug. And in this case, the benefits for the patient who was taking to the particular patient were not so big, they were marginal. So the benefits were not for the patient, the benefits were for the public health. Well, we either could fight with the regulatory or let's say try to influence to change it, but then we could have been looking at 4 to 10 years delay because it is what it takes to change the regulatory requirements. So we decided to redo our clinical plan. And the plan came so that the primary product, we chose a new primary product with a market of $1 billion. Everybody happy. The second change we made is that the indication to the patient was now to avoid a secondary infection. Great benefits for the patient who was going to take. And this plan is actually, it was a successful commercialization project with the new plan. But we had to do some changes as well in the product formulation because the patients were now different. The patients couldn't swallow, so because they were in intensive care. So we had to go from a tablet to solution. Now anybody here who is working on drug development knows what it means. It means redoing a lot of the work that has been done before. So of course that had an effect. It was successful, but the result and the price for that was a much higher investments that were needed to continue the development. So in a summary, the innovation in design is done, it's necessary, but it's not enough to have a great innovation. So the market adoption requires overcoming of many different barriers. And not the last one is conservatism. And healthcare as a customer is a very traditional. They don't like changes. But there is a good reason for that. But you should look at the bright side. Once you get integrated in the clinical practice, you will go almost forever. So it's not a bad customer to have. Reimbursement and other financial obstacles. This is something that you keep in mind. And regulatory, we already talked more than enough. So on the way you go, you really have to kiss many frogs. There will be many of them. But because you have to choose which way to go. Many of you are either in a newly startup or thinking of finding the company. You need to, you can only work on one project, so choose carefully which one will that be. It's pretty unlikely that the people who are the right channels for you are already in your network. So get the advisors from the very early stage. all of them to cover. You need to cover the clinical, you need to cover the science and regulatory at the same time. So mistakes are okay, but make them early in the process. It costs much less. And then is the learning. It's the loop that you have to go through. And you never finish this one. Ask, learn, reevaluate, do the changes, and start again. Thanks.
So thank you very much for the presentation. Now it's time for questions. So you have your business, you want to make it internationally successful, just ask away. So, yeah, here, do you have a microphone?
Yeah, hello, and thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I found in the beginning you had these two development processes for new businesses. So you had the traditional, which were all after each other, and you had the new one, which you recommended, the one with all simultaneous. Now my question is, in an innovative company, you do a lot of new stuff. You don't necessarily know exactly the process. So when dealing with a lot of stakeholders, how do you attack that problem? So not knowing what's coming to in the future with, for example, investors and so forth.
And this is actually a very typical approach. The consequential approach is very typical for technology-driven companies in general. It depends again, when you talk about the technology, if you mean developing a technology platform, like the diagnostic testing platform, of course in that case you have to do the basic, the fundamental development. But then the question comes, what are you going to do? How are you going to turn the technology platform into a technology product? So there you need to get involved. So it is more, if you divide, I would say that's more how you divide the product development. So if it is a technology development is one thing, product development is another thing. So you just have to separate them. Well, it would be good to separate them.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to say about the doctor's view about the timing. And 10 minutes is for a very, very long time. In primary care, we have 10 minutes for one patient.
Yes.
And when you're saying we will get answers in 10 minutes, it's very long time. You should have it in 1 minute.
Okay, that's very good milestone to achieve next time. Huh? Okay, questions? Anybody? Yep, Interreg.
Thank you. I'm also involved with one of the diagnostic testing companies, and we have been working really hard the past 6 years to get to the US markets. And my question is kind of a fairly practical one. So far we have been working on getting everything ready as from the quality assurance point of view. But you emphasize that in order to really be in the market, you have to also get your tests reimbursed.
Yes.
Do you have like a practical real-life experience in that, especially in the US market? And would it be at all realistic for a small Nordic company to get into negotiations and really get it reimbursed all over the US?
You better get a specialist on that, but my comments will be that there are already reimbursement codes. So if if the test is not new, meaning that the technology is new, but the test itself is not new, then you already know what reimbursement codes could be used. If it's a totally new test, for example, very often that happens in the genetic and the molecular diagnostics, because that's a new area, then there to get, the company needs to get the new reimbursement codes to be issued, and that is 3 years of work to do. So, again, you need to check whether they already exist.
Okay. I think you have a lot of other questions. You can ask them later directly, very specific ones. Other questions, please?
Good, that was clear.
I think one question I would like to ask, I think it's a burning question not only for Estonia, but maybe especially Estonia, that we sometimes try to do, let's say, innovation through spin-offs from universities.
Mhm.
And they, I'm not saying they seem to fail, but it's a common knowledge that they are handled a little bit differently than kind of a private sector startup. Do you have any suggestions how to make sure that the spin-offs from university would actually end up as commercial companies in the market? What can we do in order to help them?
That's
Yeah,
really
it's another $1
really-
million question.
Well, there are two things that that in general would be very useful in the training at the university level, especially for the scientists, even for the engineers, and those are the management, because many with that training end up actually managing, and the second one is the commercialization. And so the only way, the only way to help them at the beginning is really to get the scientists be interested in the practical side of what could be, and what is the reason for investing that money, what they can do to actually get final results. But again, it's not always in every case, because sometimes you need really the fundamental research, but this is not what we are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Okay, so more training, more education to scientists as well.
I mean, this is always is to think, okay, why am I doing this, right? Is that because I want to satisfy my scientific interest? Or am I doing it because this is the problem that I have identified and I would like to solve it? And so that's a very simple question that everybody can ask. That's already helping.
That's very good. I think that's where exactly StartSmart can help, because if I look at the PDA and development fund and all the other partners today here, I think you all have information, so just try to spread it out even more, so the spin-off projects would be also more successful. But thank you very much, and let me give you also our result of our innovation, and we only have the commercialization part to be done here, so you will help on that. Thank you.